Hollywood did not make Tab Hunter famous by revealing him. It made him safe enough to sell. He was the clean-cut heartthrob, blond, handsome, masculine, the kind of star fans could love without asking questions. But that image needed silence. Publicity dates, gossip columns, studio pressure, and fear kept the real man out of view. Tab gave the public a fantasy while his private life became a threat to the product built around his face. What does it cost to be desired by millions when the truth cannot be seen? This is Hollywood Dark Secrets, where we ask what happened to Tab Hunter. Before he became Tab Hunter, he was born Arthur Kelm, later known as Arthur Gellion, a shy young man with the kind of clean-cut beauty Hollywood knew how to sell. He did not arrive as a trained dramatic force. He arrived as raw material. That mattered because in the 1950s, Hollywood was not only looking for actors, it was looking for usable surfaces, a face that could be printed on a magazine cover, a body that could stand in a swimsuit, a uniform, or a cowboy shirt, a smile that could make young women feel safe, a name that could sound simple enough to remember. The name came from Henry Wilson, the agent who understood the market for young male beauty better than almost anyone in town. Wilson had built a business out of finding handsome men, reshaping them, renaming them, and selling them as American fantasies. He did not just look at Arthur Kelm and see a boy. He saw a product that could be cleaned, tightened, and pushed into the frame. Arthur became Tab Hunter. The name did not sound like a person with a private history. It sounded like a poster. Short, hard, easy to print, easy to sell. That was the first cut between the real man and the public image. Arthur Kelm could have fear, doubt, desire, shame, and silence. Tab Hunter could not. He had to be bright. He had to be available. He had to look as if nothing complicated had ever touched him. That was why the name worked. It erased the weight of a private life before the audience even knew there had been one. Hollywood did not need the public to know him deeply. It needed the public to recognize him quickly. A blonde head, a clean jaw, a calm smile. The kind of face that could sit on the wall of a teenage bedroom without worrying anyone's parents. The kind of face that could make a studio executive believe that a fan magazine cover might turn into a ticket sale. That was the dream they built around him. The boy next door, but better. More polished, more photographed, more available. He could be a Marine. He could be a cowboy. He could be the safe date a mother would approve. He could be a fantasy for women without ever asking the audience to think too hard about what he wanted. That was the bargain. The public could desire him because the studio promised there was nothing hidden there. But the promise was false from the beginning. The private man did not match the public product. That was not a small problem in 1950s Hollywood. It was a career problem. It was a contract problem. It was a gossip column problem. It was a question of whether the studio could keep selling him as the perfect straight American sweetheart, while knowing that the real person behind the product had to stay out of sight. Tab Hunter's early image worked because it was simple. The real man was not simple at all. That is where the pressure began. Tab Hunter became famous at the exact moment fan magazines had enormous power over the public imagination. Those magazines did not just report on stars. They helped manufacture the version of stars the public was allowed to love. They turned studio stills into intimacy. They turned staged dates into romance. They turned publicity into evidence. For a young star like Hunter, That system was not decoration. It was the cage. The photographs were clean: Tab on a beach, Tab in a uniform, Tab with a horse, Tab smiling beside a young actress, Tab looking strong, polite, harmless, and available. Nothing in those images asked the audience to question him. That was the point. The studio did not need him to be mysterious in a dangerous way. It needed him to be desirable in a controlled way. His breakthrough came through roles that reinforced the image. In Battle Cry, he could be sold as young, masculine, military, romantic, and safe. In The Burning Hills and The Girl He Left Behind, Warner Brothers could place him beside Natalie Wood and let the public read the pairing as a young American dream. The films mattered, but the packaging around them mattered just as much. Every public appearance, every magazine spread, every photo beside a woman helped hold the image in place. At the height of that public fantasy, Hunter received more than 62,000 Valentines in 1 year. That detail is not just a piece of trivia. It tells you how successful the construction had become. Those Valentines were not addressed to Arthur Kelm. They were not addressed to the private man who had to watch every word and every gesture. They were sent to Tab Hunter, the fantasy, the face, the safe dream. That number also tells you why the studio had no reason to disturb the lie. When a star can pull that much devotion from the public, the system does not ask whether the image is fair to the person inside it. It asks whether the image is still profitable. This is where teen idol packaging becomes especially cruel. An older leading man can sometimes be given shadow, scandal, and roughness. A teen idol is not allowed that much complication. He has to be clean enough for bedroom walls and Sunday magazine pages. He has to seem romantic without seeming adult in any messy way. He has to offer desire without threat. He has to belong to millions of strangers while pretending that nobody owns him. For Tab Hunter, that meant every public romance carried weight. If a magazine printed him with Natalie Wood, Debbie Reynolds, or another young actress, the point was not only publicity, it was reassurance. The studio was saying, look, he is exactly what we told you he was. The safe young dream, the clean American sweetheart, the man young women were told to want, and the man the studio needed him to appear to be. But publicity is not the same as truth. Hunter later described living two lives: a private life that was not discussed, and a Hollywood life built around work, appearances, and silence. That sentence is the center of the story. Not because secrecy is shocking, but because the secrecy was useful to everyone except him. The public got the dream. The studio got the money. The magazines got the stories. Tab Hunter got the role he had to keep playing even when the camera stopped. The danger did not begin with a dramatic public scandal. It began with a record from the past. In 1950, before Tab Hunter had become the polished Warner Brothers heartthrob, he was arrested for disorderly conduct after police raided a party. Later accounts describe it as a party attended mostly by gay men. Hunter paid a fine and moved on. At the time, he was not yet the face of a national fantasy. The incident could have stayed small. In another life, it might have disappeared. Hollywood did not allow small things to stay small when they could be used. By 1955, Tab Hunter was no longer just another young man with a good face. He was a rising Warner Brothers star. That old record suddenly had value. Confidential magazine, the scandal publication that made a business out of private damage, put the story into circulation. The magazine understood exactly where to press. It did not need to say everything directly. It only needed to point, hint, and let the audience fill in the rest. That is how gossip worked in that era. It could destroy by suggestion. It could ruin without spelling out the thing it wanted the audience to understand. A few carefully chosen words could turn a private life into a public threat. For Hunter, the fear was immediate. He believed the story could end his career. In the world he was living in, that fear was not dramatic. It was practical. A morals clause could be used against a star. Public opinion could turn. Theater owners could hesitate. Studio chiefs could decide the risk was no longer worth the money. A career built on clean desire could be damaged by one old record and a few cruel lines of print. But the deeper betrayal was not simply that Confidential ran the story. The deeper wound was how the story got there. Later accounts say Henry Wilson gave confidential information about Hunter's old arrest, along with another damaging story about Rory Calhoun to keep the magazine away from Rock Hudson. That detail makes the case more than a tabloid scandal. It turns the story into a map of power. Tab Hunter was not just exposed by gossip culture. He was used by the same machinery that had helped build him. That is the cold part. The image machine did not always protect the person. It protected the most valuable product. If one client could be damaged so another client remained untouched, the calculation could be made. If one secret could be traded to bury another, the trade could happen. In that system, loyalty had a price, and the price depended on box office value. Hunter survived the article, but survival did not mean safety. The story did not end his career immediately. In fact, his popularity held. He continued to rise. He remained valuable enough for Warner Brothers to keep selling him. That fact makes the system even clearer. The studio did not protect him because it respected his private life. It kept him because the product still worked. That is the difference between care and containment. Care protects a person. Containment protects an investment. After Confidential, Warner Brothers had a choice. It could step away from Tab Hunter. It could treat him as damaged goods. It could decide the wholesome image was too risky to maintain. It did not do that. The studio knew the public still wanted him, and wanting was money. So the machine did what it knew how to do. It kept the image moving. It pushed him harder into the kind of roles and publicity that made the audience forget the question. Natalie Wood became part of that public story. She was young, famous, beautiful, and already familiar to audiences. Warner Brothers placed Hunter and Wood together in films and in the public imagination. The Burning Hills gave the studio a Western pairing. The girl he'd left behind gave the studio another chance to sell them as youthful, attractive, and uncomplicated. The fan magazines had what they needed: a handsome young man, a young actress, and enough photographs to turn professional proximity into romance. The point is not that every friendship with a woman was false. That would be too simple and unfair. Hunter had real friendships with women. He worked with them. He liked some of them. They liked him. The problem was not friendship. The problem was how publicity used friendship as cover. When a studio needs a straight fantasy, a woman standing beside the star becomes evidence. A dinner becomes a date. A photograph becomes a promise. A smile becomes a headline. A public appearance becomes a wall between the audience and the truth. That was the burden of Tab Hunter's image. He was not only acting in films, he was acting in public. He had to let the studio sell a version of him that made sense to the audience, even when that version made less and less room for the real man. This is why his story is different from a simple outing narrative. The scandal is not just that Hunter had to hide his orientation. The scandal is that the entire industry made money from the hiding. Every magazine cover, every arranged date, every safe romantic headline helped keep the fantasy alive. His silence was not just personal fear. It was part of the business model. The audience was not being asked to love a real person. It was being handed a polished fantasy until the person underneath could barely breathe. The relationship with Anthony Perkins gives this story its human center. It also shows how narrow the space for honesty really was. Later accounts place Hunter and Perkins together at the Chateau Marmont in 1956. The contrast was easy to read. Hunter was the blonde Warner Brothers dreamboat, all clean lines and public ease. Perkins had a darker, more nervous energy, tied to New York theater and a different kind of acting world. On paper, they looked like opposite products. In private, that difference helped draw them together. The relationship lasted for years, but it could not exist in daylight. Not in any ordinary way. Not in the Hollywood they were working inside. Both men understood the risk. A public relationship would not have been treated as romance. It would have been treated as a professional threat. Their studios did not need to say that every hour. The rule was already in the air. They had to move carefully. Hunter later described how cautious they were in public. If they went to a movie, they might arrive separately or use small disguises, like baseball caps. That is not glamorous. It is exhausting. It means even a night out required planning. It means affection had to pass through calculation before it could happen. The cruelest part is that both men could be seen everywhere, but not as themselves. They could be photographed with women. They could stand under lights. They could smile at premieres. They could be watched by crowds. But the part of life that mattered privately had to stay hidden from the same public that claimed to love them. Later accounts describe both men publicly dating starlets while keeping their relationship discreet. That detail is almost too precise in what it reveals. The public saw the approved image first. The real life had to wait until the performance was over. Hunter remembered Perkins with care, not as a cartoon villain or a simple betrayal. He saw him as an important part of his life. But they were under different pressures, and they wanted different kinds of control over the future. Perkins wanted a serious acting career, and later became tied to one of the most famous screen roles of the 20th century. Hunter wanted success too, but his relationship to fame was not the same. He had learned early that fame could offer security, but also take ownership of your name, your face, and your silence. Their relationship did not need a single dramatic ending to be painful. The conditions around it were already doing the damage. The studios, the gossip columns, the fan magazines, and the public expectations gave them almost no honest room to stand in. When a private relationship must survive only in gaps, parked cars, side entrances, careful timing, and silence, the relationship is already carrying more weight than love alone can hold. The story is not that Tab Hunter and Anthony Perkins were a hidden couple. The story is that Hollywood had room to sell them both, but not room to let them be seen together as real men. Tab Hunter's story will always be linked to Rock Hudson because of Henry Wilson, Confidential, and the shared pressure of closeted stardom. but the two cases are not the same. Rock Hudson was sold as a large-scale romantic leading man, a polished adult fantasy of masculine strength, marriageability, and later romantic comedy charm. His image leaned into size, confidence, and the promise of a conventional husband. Hudson's public mask was built to look solid. He became the man audiences could imagine as the perfect partner in a middle-class romantic dream. Tab Hunter's image was younger, cleaner, and in some ways more fragile. He was not sold first as the adult husband. He was sold as the boy next door, the heartthrob, the clean bedroom wall fantasy, the blonde Marine, cowboy, singer, date, and dream. His trap was not only masculinity, it was innocence. That made the pressure different. A boy next door image cannot absorb much complication. It depends on being simple. A little scandal can sometimes make an older male star look dangerous. For Hunter, danger could damage the very thing the studio was selling. He had to look open while being guarded. He had to look available while living privately. He had to look easy to understand while knowing that the truth would complicate the product. The difference also shows in how the system used them. According to later accounts, Wilson helped protect Hudson by offering up information about Hunter and Rory Calhoun. That does not mean Hunter was unimportant. It means Hudson had become the bigger asset at that moment. In Hollywood, the value of a secret could be measured by the value of the star it protected. Hunter was caught inside the same machine, but in a different position. He was useful enough to keep, but not always valuable enough to shield from every blow. He was famous enough to sell magazines, but not powerful enough to control what those magazines could do with his past. That is why his case cuts differently. He was not destroyed in one public explosion. He was managed, redirected, contained, repackaged, kept moving as long as the fantasy stayed useful. That kind of control can look less dramatic from the outside. It can also last longer. Then came Young Love. In 1957, Tab Hunter recorded the song for Dot Records, not Warner Brothers. The record became a #1 hit. For the public, it was another proof of the fantasy. The clean-cut movie star could sing too. The voice was simple, romantic, and easy to buy. For fans, it made him even more complete. He was not just a face on screen, he was a voice coming through the radio. For Jack Warner, it was a problem. Hunter was under contract to Warner Brothers, and Warner did not like the idea that another company could profit from one of his stars. The success of Young Love showed that Hunter's value reached beyond film. He could sell records. He could move teenagers. He could make money in a space the studio did not fully control. Hollywood likes profit, but it likes profit more when the pipeline belongs to the studio. Warner Brothers responded by tightening control. The studio moved into the record business, and Hunter's music became part of that larger push. That move tells you how the system thought. It was not enough to own the movie image. The studio wanted the voice, too. This is one of the clearest examples of Hunter's real problem. His success did not make him free. It gave the studio more reasons to control him. A hit record should have expanded his life. Instead, it tightened the contract around him. That is the trap of studio-era stardom. When the product works, the person inside the product does not necessarily gain power. Sometimes, success only proves to the company that the product must be guarded more closely. Hunter later grew frustrated with Warner Brothers. He did not want to be locked forever into the same soft, safe, young roles. He wanted to work. He wanted to prove he was not only a magazine face. He wanted more than being the boy women were told to adore. But the more he pushed against the image, the more he risked losing the protection that image gave him. Leaving Warner Brothers was a major turning point. He later understood that walking away from a major studio meant losing more than steady work. It also meant losing the machinery that could bury bad press, arrange publicity, and keep the illusion clean. Freedom cost him. Control had cost him too. There was no clean choice. That is what makes his story so painful. Staying meant continuing to live inside a false image. Leaving meant stepping outside the shield that had kept the business around him intact. A teen idol image is built with an expiration date. Hollywood rarely admits that, but it is true. The same qualities that make a young star explode can later make him hard to place. The clean face, the safe smile, the boyish appeal, the public devotion. All of it works until the market moves, the audience changes, and the boy is no longer a boy. Tab Hunter tried to push beyond the surface. Gunman's Walk gave him a harder edge. Damn Yankees let him use his musical charm in a broader, more playful way. He did not lack talent or discipline, but the industry had already trained the public to read him as a type. Once a star becomes a type, every attempt to escape can look like a mistake. This is another part of the cost. The image that makes you famous can also make people underestimate you. If the public knows you first as a pinup, they may resist seeing you as an actor. If fan magazines sell you as a fantasy, critics may treat the fantasy as proof that there is nothing serious underneath. Hunter was not the first star caught in that trap, and he would not be the last. But for him, the trap had an extra layer. He was not only fighting a teen idol image, he was fighting an image designed to cover his real life. The more he tried to grow as a performer, the more he had to move away from the exact fantasy that had protected him. His career did not end overnight. It shifted. Television, stage work, smaller films, foreign projects, guest appearances. He kept working. That matters. The easy version would say, Hollywood exposed him and he disappeared. The truth is less clean. He survived, adapted, and kept moving. But the center of the industry had changed its relationship to him. The old machine had already used the brightest version of Tab Hunter. It had less use for a man who wanted to define himself. That is why the story should not be reduced to a closeted star got exposed. The better question is this: what happens when a person outlives the fantasy that made him profitable? For Hunter, the answer was years of work, reinvention, caution, and silence. He was still there. But the public image that once made him a major commodity had started to lose its force. Living two lives sounds simple when said quickly. It was not simple in practice. It meant knowing which restaurant was safe. It meant knowing which photographer might be nearby. It meant understanding that a friend could become a rumor. It meant letting a magazine print a version of your life that people close to you knew was incomplete. It meant smiling beside a woman you liked while knowing the image was being used to erase the part of you that could not be spoken. It also meant keeping your own emotional history under control. Letters, photographs, phone calls, addresses, names, jokes, glances, habits. Anything ordinary could become dangerous if the wrong person found it. A private life needs small records to feel real. A closeted star in that era often had to treat those records like evidence. Hunter's story is full of that quiet pressure. It was not one door slamming. It was the daily habit of caution, not saying too much, not standing too close, not looking too long, not trusting that fame would protect you if the public decided to turn. This is where the system did its most lasting damage. It trained people to police themselves. A studio did not have to send an executive into every room. The fear came with the star. It sat with him in restaurants. It followed him into interviews. It stood beside him in front of photographers. It made him think before answering simple questions. Who are you seeing? Are you getting married? What kind of girl do you like? For another star, those questions might be irritating. For Hunter, they were traps dressed as publicity. He could not answer the truth. He could not refuse too sharply. He could not look frightened. He had to remain pleasant, light, charming, and available. That is a very specific kind of labor. It is not acting in a film. It is acting as a life. The public saw the smile. The studio saw the money. Hunter carried the cost in private. Years later, the strangest rescue came from the place old Hollywood would never have chosen for him. John Waters did not need Tab Hunter to be the perfect boy next door. He wanted the history of that image and the shock of turning it inside out. Polyester, released in 1981, placed Hunter opposite Divine. For audiences who remembered him from his Warner Brothers heartthrob years, it was a jolt. The clean-cut idol from the fan magazines had stepped into a world of camp, bad taste, loud color, and open defiance. That move could have looked like a fall if you judged it by old studio rules. It was not. It was a release. Polyester let Hunter use the old image without being trapped by it. The joke worked because the audience knew what he had represented. He did not have to pretend he was still the untouched boy on the magazine cover. He could play with the memory of that boy. He could stand next to Divine and let the whole old idea of respectable Hollywood look stiff and frightened by comparison. This was not the same kind of fame he had in the 1950s. It was smaller, sharper, freer. It gave him a new audience, including gay audiences who understood the distance between public image and private survival. Hunter did not need to explain every piece of his history for the casting to mean something. His presence alone carried the weight. Lust in the Dust pushed that reinvention further. Hunter helped shape the project, worked with Alan Glazer, and found a kind of creative partnership that did not look like the old studio machine. The work was messy, comic, independent, and very far from the carefully washed Warner Brothers fantasy. That was the point. The old system had wanted him polished. These later projects let him be in on the joke. They let him stop pretending the old image was sacred. They gave him room to be older, stranger, funnier, and more self-aware than the teen idol machine ever allowed. For a man who had spent years being packaged by others, that mattered. He was no longer just the product. He was making choices. Alan Glazer became central to the final part of Hunter's story. Not because he turned Hunter into a new product, but because he helped create the conditions for Hunter to tell his own version of the old one. Their relationship lasted for decades. That alone is important. Hollywood had once trained Hunter to treat private life as something that could cost him work. With Glazer, the private life became less like a threat and more like a home. That does not erase the past. It does not repair every year of silence. But it changes the ending. Glazer also encouraged Hunter to write his story. Hunter knew that if he stayed silent forever, other people would fill the space. That is what Hollywood had always done. Agents filled the space. Publicity departments filled the space. Fan magazines filled the space. Confidential filled the space. Later writers would do the same if he left the record open. Tab Hunter. Confidential, published in 2005, was not just a celebrity memoir. It was a correction. It allowed Hunter to say what the studio-era publicity machine had never allowed him to say plainly. It gave him back the right to connect Arthur Kelm, Arthur Gellion, and Tab Hunter inside one life. That is the real power of the memoir. It did not simply reveal that he was gay. By then, the larger culture had changed. The deeper revelation was how long the machinery had required him to deny ordinary truth. The book showed the cost of being turned into a safe fantasy. It showed what a studio-era image could demand from the person forced to wear it. The documentary Tab Hunter Confidential carried that work further in 2015. By then, Hunter was older, more direct, and more able to speak about the private life that had once been dangerous to mention. The documentary included his relationship with Anthony Perkins, his long partnership with Glazer, and the culture that had made silence feel necessary. There is a quiet strength in that. Hunter did not try to reinvent himself as a bitter man. He did not need to shout. He simply told the story from inside the image. That is more damaging to the old machine than any loud attack could be. A system can dismiss anger. It has a harder time dismissing a survivor who remembers the details. For years, the public was trained to look at Tab Hunter and see an answer. Handsome, straight, available, safe. The perfect boy next door. A man who could be placed beside Natalie Wood in a magazine and make everything look simple. But the truth was never simple. The image was designed to make it simple. What the public got wrong was not only Hunter's orientation. The deeper mistake was believing that the public image was harmless. It came with a cost. It required discipline, silence, and fear. It allowed women in his public life to be used as reassurance for a story the studio wanted the audience to believe. It required men like Hunter and Perkins to keep their real lives out of sight. It required old records to become weapons. It required agents and studios to decide which secrets could be sacrificed and which ones had to be protected. The fantasy had a human cost. That is the part that still matters. Tab Hunter's story is not valuable because it lets an audience say, "Look, a secret gay star." That is too easy. It turns a painful history into a headline. The real story is about how the star system built a version of masculinity so clean that the real man had no room to breathe inside it. The boy next door fantasy did not only hide Hunter's private life, it replaced him. It gave the audience a person they could love without questions, then punish the real person for having answers the audience was not supposed to hear. This is where his story becomes larger than one actor. Hollywood has always sold images, but certain images require someone to disappear inside them. For women, the machine often demanded beauty, obedience, and youth. For men like Hunter, it demanded strength, heterosexual certainty, and emotional simplicity. If the real person did not fit, the real person had to be hidden. Hunter survived that system. But survival is not the same as freedom. Freedom came later, and even then, it came after decades of silence. Tab Hunter matters because he shows how gentle an image can look while still being brutal to the person inside it. There was nothing visibly harsh about the fantasy. That was why it worked. It came with soft lighting, fan letters, beach photos, studio romances, popular records, and magazine covers. It looked clean, It looked harmless. It looked like success. But behind that success was a man learning how to divide himself. One life for the public. One life for himself. One name on the posters. Another name inside the room. One smile for the camera. Another truth that could not safely be printed. That divide is the heart of the story. He was not destroyed by one article, one agent, one studio, or one relationship. Those things mattered, but the real pressure came from the entire structure around him. The studios needed the image. The magazines fed it. The audience was taught to believe it. The gossip press threatened to profit from exposing the lie, and Hunter had to live inside the space between all of them. The later years changed the meaning of the story. Polyester and Lust in the Dust showed that the old image could be bent, mocked, and survived. Alan Glazer gave him a private steadiness the studio years had not allowed. The memoir and documentary let him speak in his own name. That is the ending Hollywood could not have written for him in 1955. Back then, the system wanted him quiet, clean, and useful. Decades later, he was still there, telling the truth the machine had built itself around hiding. Tab Hunter did not become a legend because Hollywood told the truth about him. He became a legend because Hollywood sold a beautiful lie, and he lived long enough to explain what that lie cost. The studio sold the image. The public desired it. The magazines kept it alive. But behind that name was a real man who had to measure every public smile against private fear. He was asked to sell romance while hiding love. He was asked to look open while staying guarded. He was asked to be the perfect American boy next door, even when that perfect boy had been designed to keep the real person out of view. That is why this story should not be watched as gossip. It should be watched as a warning. A star image can look harmless. It can be printed on a magazine cover. It can be sent through the mail on thousands of Valentines. It can be framed as romance, youth, and clean American desire. But if that image can only survive through silence, then the image has already taken something from the person carrying it. Tab Hunter's great victory was not that he kept working. It was not that he survived Confidential. It was not even that he later became a gay icon through camp classics and public honesty. His victory was that he finally took back the story from the people who had rented out his silence. Hollywood made him safe enough to sell. Later, he made himself honest enough to remember. This is Hollywood Dark Secrets, where we do not treat old Hollywood scandals as gossip. We look at the system behind the image, the people it protected, and the people it used. If you want more stories like Tab Hunter's, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and tell us which Hollywood legend you want us to examine next. Because behind every perfect star image, there is always one question the studio hoped the public would never ask. What happened to the person underneath?